we are in a series from Tom Rainer's book called I Am a Church Member, and we are on part 4 tonight. This series has just explores being a church member, if you will, and the benefits of that. Hey, Sister Chris. Hey, Sister Cooper. And so we are on part 4 of that. And tonight we're going to be looking in Exodus. Yes, tryouts are at 9 a.m. on Sunday. I think Brother Jim should be the guy in the middle with all the moves. I don't know why. I saw Brother Jim there. You know, I don't know. I feel like the Lord is calling him to that ministry. You can respond to that call, Brother Jim, if you would just heed to the voice of the Lord. But for some reason, I just saw your face on that guy doing all those moves. So anyways, we're going to be looking at Exodus chapter 17. We're going to look at verse 1, and we're going to read down to the 7th verse. Exodus chapter 17, verse 1, down to the 17th verse. All right, here we go. The word of the Lord, it reads this. It says, "And then all the congregation of the children of Israel set out on their journey from the wilderness of Sin, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped in Rephidim. But there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people contended with Moses and said, 'Give us water that we may drink.' So Moses said to them, 'Why do you contend with me? Why do you tempt the Lord?' And the people thirst there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, 'Why is it you have brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?' Verse 4, "And so Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, 'What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'Go on before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel. And also take in your hand your rod with which you struck the river, and go. And behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb. And you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, that the people may drink.' And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And so he called the name of the place Massiah in Meribah, because of the contention of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, 'Is the Lord among us or not?'" Is the Lord among us or not? I want to talk about this in chapter 4 in Tom Rainer's book. On this thought, he says, "I will pray for my church leaders. I will pray for my church leaders." I have to confess tonight that this evening I was kind of a bit nervous about this chapter in the book. I felt a little uncomfortable even preaching about this particular topic, because I am intimately a part of this scope. But as I studied and I prepared, and I just constantly saw multiple times, especially throughout the New Testament, where Paul asked for prayers for his needs and for the need of his journey and his ministry companions. And I realized that if the Apostle Paul thought it was important enough to do on multiple occasions to write to churches that he started, and that he ministered at, and that he would write letters to them asking for prayer on multiple different occasions, then we shouldn't feel awkward to do the same thing as well. And leadership in general today is tougher than ever before, and church leadership is no different. And leadership, it's tougher. It's tougher today. And there's this attitude that resists authority that pervades not only the world, but the church as well at times. And leadership is not always an easy job. Maybe you serve at some kind of capacity at your job as a leader. And maybe you serve as a manager or a supervisor. And leadership is just not easy. I manage an office where I work at, and so it's tough sometimes because people from other offices, we have offices all over the country, they start becoming more dependent on me to do something that maybe they can't do, or maybe they don't have the skill set or the ability or the time to do something. And so they've been really starting to lean more on me. And so leadership just isn't always easy. It's not always an easy job. In fact, I would say leadership is probably really never an easy job. People often distrust leaders, though, as well. Over the last 20 years of my life, my experience with even probably your experience as well, and definitely the season and the time that we live in right now, and with voting going on. And if you haven't voted yet, then you need to get out there and vote so that your voice can be heard, especially Christians, right? But our experience with political parties and corporate, and even, sad to say, people that are leaders in the church, have put some of us, maybe at times, in a position to be weary at times. I think that attitude especially applies to church leaders. I know that over the years, I've seen numerous of people that were pastors or church leadership that I've seen horrendous, truthfully harmful scandals that have affected the church's testimony to the world, and unfortunately, yet sometimes even our organization. We don't like to talk about that. We like to sweep that under the rug and not really talk about that. But if we were to be honest for just a moment tonight, you don't. At some point in time in your life, I'm sure you heard of a scandal happening in a church somewhere in the world. Especially from mega churches, it seems, because of their platform, they often end up in the news. And thankfully, that is not our church, right? But scandals throughout the world, nonetheless, shouldn't even surprise us. The Bible clearly tells us that there will be people who will try to use church leadership for ungodly purposes. Matthew chapter 7 verse 15 tells us this. It says, "Beware of false prophets, for who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves." They are ravenous wolves. And Paul warns the elders of the church at Ephesus in Acts chapter 20, verse 29 through 31, he says, "And for this I know, that after my departure, savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. And also from among yourselves, men will rise up, speaking perverse things to draw away the disciples after themselves. Therefore, watch and remember that for 3 years I did not cease to warn everyone night and day with tears." The role and the goal of the church leadership is to mold, to shape local believers into a biblically functioning team. That is my goal. That is the goal of a pastor. A team works together to achieve and work toward the same goal, just like any sports team. The church is made up of people with different gifts, different personalities, different levels of skill sets. A church's leadership is put into place to shape all of these different parts of the members of the body of people who utilize their differences, yet they work to accomplish the same goal, to further the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is our goal. Most sports teams have one person on their team that is the MVP. It stands for the most valuable player. I remember as a kid, I used to collect baseball cards. I still have them actually, and they're old now. And so I used to collect the ones that were actually worth something. Were often these really old green cards that I have, and it's the MVP cards, the most valuable player cards. And if the local church is seen as a team working together to accomplish the same goals, does the local church have an MVP? Does the church today have a most valuable player? I think that the church has multiple most valuable players. And if that idea is correct, then who might these people be? Some would say that the ministerial staff or the elders of the church are the most valuable players. On a sports team, the coaches are important. They're the people who get the team in proper condition. They teach them what they need to know and what they're supposed to do to deal with difficulties of the team, to develop game plans and strategies and even a whole lot more. But coaches are not the MVPs. You might think that an MVP in a church would be the giver, the tither, right? Well, it takes money to run a church, and while that is true, it does. There are those people who give sacrificially, and you can always count on them when there's a financial need that is presented. And you might say maybe it's the encourager. All right, this player, the encourager, is a group, is made up of those people within the congregation who notice when we get down or when we get discouraged, and they come alongside us and they speak words of encouragement and they make us feel loved and supported. You might say that it is the quiet servant who never is in the spotlight is the most valuable player. These people work in the background. They often don't get noticed. These are the team members who are very faithful day in and day out, discreetly doing what needs to always be done. And maybe you think that the MVP is that talented person. Maybe it's a singer, maybe it's a preacher, maybe it's a teacher, maybe it's a musician that is enjoyed by their talent. You might even think that the MVP is the worker, right? The workers are those people who give of their time and their effort anytime something needs to be accomplished for the church. And you can always count on them to roll up their sleeves and to get their hands dirty and just do whatever you ask them to do. But none of those people are the most valuable players. And while their gifts and their talents and their efforts are necessary for the work of the gospel of Jesus Christ to thrive, there are many important and crucial team members, and they're all valuable, and they're all important, and they all have a part to play. Have you ever noticed that successful sport teams have one person who serves as a catalyst to make them function better? But the strange thing it's not always the smartest or the most talented person on the team. But when this person is in the game, the team gets together and puts their best effort forward. But when you see the church, the most valuable player, the MVP, it is not the most valuable player. It is the most valuable prayer. The church's most valuable player are those who constantly lift up their voice unto the Lord for the congregation in prayer, especially praying for those who are in leadership and for our elders. And church leaders need prayer. We need your prayers. You may not know it, but leaders do more than what maybe some others can do. And your church leaders are not just leaders when they're in this building. They are servant leaders who serve all week long. Just this past week, I was talking to an elder from our church who's telling me a story about him witnessing to this young man at a grocery store. And he had been reaching out to him and is still reaching out to him for the past 3 years. Not 3 days, not 30 minutes. He has been sowing seed in this person's heart for 3 years. I'm thankful for our leaders and our elders who give themselves unselfishly and say, hey, just because the fruit doesn't come automatically, or if it doesn't come when I want it to, I'm still going to be faithful. And if you've never been a church leader, there are lots of things that happen that very few people often know about. Visits to people who are struggling physically, mentally, spiritually. Money that is given out to help someone and aid someone who is in need. Tasks that are done that no one else wants to do. Leaders go through more than what most people imagine. Spiritual leadership can be a very grueling experience at times. I've seen ministers chewed up and spit out like a piece of gum by people in the church, congregations who had no thought for anything but their own enrichment. And some of those leaders stayed within ministry, but I've also seen some of those people leave the ministry. Many have quit the ministry because people who are supposed to be Christ-like have been anything but, and the toll on their spirit and their emotion and their families have been too much in order for them to continue. And thankfully, and I may be a little biased here, but that is not the case with our church. I believe that I pastor the greatest church and the greatest people on this earth. And I mean that with all my heart. I thank God for the Rock Church every single day. I'm so thankful for the amazing people that I have the privilege and the honor to serve alongside each and every single one of you. It is never grueling. It is never a burden to be your pastor. And I thank God all the time for you. And I thank God for this church. It's not just ministry staff who struggle through tough times. I've known good leaders in ministry who have quit their positions and even church because of how much pressure was on them of leadership has caused problems in their homes, problems in their business, problems in their finances, and church leaders face the same struggles that everyone else faces. They have worries about family members and financial struggles and health issues and all kinds of concerns that they have to take care of along with everyone else's problems. Leaders do things that are unpopular at times. They're difficult, many times draining physically, emotionally, spiritually. There are times when biblical standards must be upheld, but those standards are not popular. And people become critical in their words and in their behavior towards leaders who stay the course of spiritual and scriptural guidelines. Someone I heard once said that church leadership is a lot like herding cats. Trying to herd cats. Try it sometime. We got plenty out on our property here. Try to go and herd those cats together and get them in one spot. Then they scatter like cockroaches if you get close to them. And you see how difficult that is. And church leadership, it can be pleasant and agreeable, but can also be unpleasant and challenging at times. Leaders are held to a higher standard than most people. And that's not just true in the eyes of people, but it's also true in the eyes of the Word of God. James chapter 3 verse 1 confirms this. It says, "My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. That's encouraging, isn't it, for all you leaders out there? James 3:1, he said, take a second look at becoming a leader because you're going to receive a stricter judgment. That every Christian should be held to a high level of standard because we all represent Jesus Christ. But leaders are called to be examples to the flock. And so I want to give you some reasons why you should pray for your church leaders. We shouldn't necessarily need specific reasons to pray for one another, but here are some reasons to pray for your church leaders and your elders of the church. And the first reason is because leaders are likely to be attacked. Satan watches and he waits for the right time to attack a leader, and usually the enemy attacks on leaders come immediately following a victory, or when a leader is physically or emotionally tired. The attacks can come from within the camp, within your congregation, and also from the outside of your congregation, and usually it's at both simultaneously. Exodus 17, verse 1 and 7 in our text tonight. The whole Israelite community, they set out from the desert of sin. They're traveling from place to place as the Lord had commanded them. And they camped by Rephidim. But there was no water for the people to drink for them, their families, or their livestock. And so they quarreled with Moses and they're like, give us something to drink. Did you just bring us out here to die? And Moses responded, why do you quarrel with me? Why are you testing the Lord? And Moses was a great leader, but he was tired and he was weary from leading those people in the wilderness. They were a quarrelsome and critical bunch of people, and they were never satisfied for what God or for what Moses was doing for them. And that sets up to see what happens next. And in Exodus chapter 17, verse 8, and the Ammonites, they came and they attacked the Israelites. But look at when did the attack happen? It was at a time of quarreling and contention. Because when you are spiritually and emotionally and physically drained, that is when the enemy, somebody needs to hear me tonight. When you are spiritually and when you are emotionally and when you are physically drained, that is when the adversary sees an opportune time to attack you. He did it to Jesus in the wilderness when Jesus was fasting for 40 days. What happened? Satan came to tempt Jesus, and Jesus remained sinless because he constantly spoke the word of God and corrected what the adversary was trying to spin that was incorrect. Because while Jesus was hungry and while Jesus was thirsty, there was one thing that was not hungry. There was one thing that was not thirsty, and that was his spirit. And Jesus remained sinless, but Luke gives us an important note concerning the plans that the devil, Satan, had for later. In Luke chapter 4, verse 13, it says, now when the devil had ended every temptation, it says he departed from him, being Jesus, until an opportune time. After Satan realized that he was not going to trip Jesus up, it says he left him, he departed from him, but that doesn't mean that he might have been out of sight, but he was not out of mind. He said, until another opportunity comes. I'll leave for now, but I'm going to come back. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8 says, be sober. Be vigilant. Because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. The devil wants to attack the church leaders because he knows that if he can pull a leader down, then he can do more damage than he can with everyone else. And church leaders are susceptible to all the temptations that everybody else in the congregation and in the world faces. And if they aren't held up in prayer, they eventually can get so worn out that they can stumble and they can falter and even fail. It scares me when I see ministers who act like they are up so high up that the devil can't touch them. And while I'm not giving power or authority to the adversary to have access to my life, I'm also not going to be naive to think that I'm so spiritually minded and I'm so far and high up that he can't touch me. Because Job did everything on the side of the Lord. And Jesus, the Lord, still allowed the enemy to touch him, to touch his family, to touch his emotion, to touch his mind, to touch his physical body, to touch his family and kill his family, to touch his money. He lost it all. But because he remained faithful, he received a double portion. The second reason to pray for your church leaders is because these leaders exist to inspire and to guide us. In order to do that well and to do it on a consistent basis, you need others to come along and support you. You can't constantly do that and not get weary. But if you have prayers going up for one another, then you can do it because you have someone who is covering you in the spirit world. That even when you get tired and weary in your physical, there is a strength, there is a spirit, there is a stream of the Spirit that is still flowing to reach you, to cover you, to strengthen you, to encourage you, to inspire you to keep on keeping on. In Exodus chapter 17, verse 9, Moses said to Joshua, he said, choose some of our men and go out to fight the Ammonites. He said, tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with my staff of God in my hand. And Moses guided Joshua and the fighting men to where they needed to be. And then he moved to his position at the top of the hill. And there are several reasons that Moses needed to sit on the hill with the staff of God in his hand. And the first reason is because Moses needed to be able to see and observe the battle. The second reason is because Moses needed to be where he could see, that he could be seen by the soldiers on the battlefield. So there was a direct line of communication. And the third and the most important, I believe, Moses needed to be to lift his hands in prayer to intercede on behalf of the army, on behalf of the soldiers and the children of Israel for whom they were fighting against. And his prayers were inspiration for victory. Moses understood the importance of leadership. That the speed of the leader determines the speed of a team. That the people can go no further than their leaders have already gone. If ministers and elders of the church falter, then the church will falter. If Satan can defeat the leaders, he can defeat the congregation. Leaders need prayer so that they can inspire and guide the people. And the third reason why we need prayer is because leaders are human. Too often I see people put ministers and leaders on this pedestal. And God, we have to be careful about that. I'm not saying you shouldn't have reverence for spiritual leadership in your life. You should. That's biblical. I'm not saying you shouldn't submit to spiritual authority to your pastor in your life. You should do that. I have a pastor in my life and I submit to him. I have elders in my life that I hold very dear to me, and Sister Charmaine does as well. And we submit to them because we understand leadership. It's biblical to do that. But leaders, even in the church, we're human. Exodus 17, verse 10 through 12, it says, "So Joshua did as Moses said to him, and he fought with the Amalekites. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And so it was when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let his hand down, the Amalekites prevailed. But Moses' hands became heavy. So they took a stone and they put it under him, and he sat on that stone as a seat. And Aaron and Hur supported Moses' hands, one on each side and the other on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And the Israelites prevailed because Moses' hands were lifted up, because Aaron was on one side holding his hand up, and Hur was on the other side holding his hand up, because Moses could not do it on his own. Moses could not do it by himself. It was necessary for everyone to do their part, and I can tell you, I cannot do it by myself. Sister Charmaine cannot do it by herself. Even me and her together cannot do it by ourselves. Moses had to intercede in prayer to God for their efforts. But notice also that Aaron and Hur, they played a huge role in their victory. They assisted Moses because the work of inspiring, guiding was so physically taxing. And if you don't believe me that is so hard, what Moses physically did by holding his hands up, go ahead and hold your hands up for the rest of this service. I guarantee you, them shoulders will begin to burn. Them arms will begin to hurt. Like, I can't do this. Hold your arms out all day tomorrow, from the rising of the sun to the going down, and I guarantee you, nor me could do it. Maybe that's something you can do tonight, right? And it shouldn't be a huge stretch of our intellect to understand that we, as church leaders, are human, and therefore we have limits. The responsibility of leadership is exceedingly heavy, and no one is capable of doing the task on their own. Hebrews 13, verse 17, it says, "Obey those who rule over you and be submissive, for they watch out for your souls as those who must give account. Let them do so with joy and not with grief, for that would be unprofitable for you." And we as leaders are accountable not just to you, but also to God. And that's a huge responsibility and a sobering and a worrisome obligation for those who take it seriously. As leaders, we can't stand up under that kind of responsibility and accountability by ourselves. And if all honesty, leaders, you're going to fail at some point. You're going to miss the mark. I'm going to mess up, I'm sure. In fact, I probably already have. I've let my parents down at times in my life. I've let my wife down at times in our marriage, and I've let God down too. And I'm sure that every one of our leaders here at TRC, at the Rock Church, can say the same thing, that you've let someone down, you've missed the mark. But that's the very reason why you need prayers, and we need prayers. All leaders need your support. In fact, everyone in our church needs your prayers. And we have to lift our prayers up for one another. And Rainer gives several areas in which we should pray for our church leaders specifically. And he says the first is to pray for their families. Don't just pray for the leaders. Pray for their wives and pray for their children. Church leaders worry that if they're neglecting their families because of demands of the church, that is a real thing. Church leaders worry about their families living in a glass house. That is a real thing. And they anguish when critics direct barbs at their family members, their spouses, and even their kids. And few families face the kinds of pressures and expectations as church leader families do. And so especially pray for the wives of our leaders and the families of our leaders. And none of us would be able to do, I can tell you for a fact, that I would not be able to do what I do without my wife. I thank God for Sister Charmaine. The second is to pray for the protection of our church leaders. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2 through 7, it says, a bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetous, one who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? And not a novice, lest being puffed up with pride, he fall into the same condemnation as the devil. Moreover, he must have a good testimony with those who are outside, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. That's quite a list, isn't it? It requires that leaders have a reputation of being beyond fault. No human leader is perfect, but Scripture spells out that we need to have reputations above most everyone else. That we must remain good, self-controlled, and sensible, respectable, and hospitable people. That we have to be gentle and not harsh and not argumentative. And to add just a little bit more pressure, our families have to reflect a healthy Christian family. And the devil seeks to entrap church leaders. He deliberately looks for ways to subvert church leaders so that he can derail the faith of church members and bring the church into chaos. And Satan sees honorable church leaders as threats and works to take them out. And when we understand that the Satan's schemes, it shouldn't be hard to understand why you should uphold your church leaders in prayers. And Rayner says this, quote, the devil is powerful, but God is so much more powerful. And God, in ways we don't always understand fully, works through the prayers of believers. And the third thing is we have to pray for the physical and the mental health of your church leaders. Serving and leading a church can expand all of a church leader's energy. It can expend all of a church leader's energy, and we're on call every day, every hour, because the demands are so great on church leaders, and it's easy to neglect our own health, and it's easy to neglect our own well-being, and I'm so guilty of it at times. And while no one is invulnerable to sickness and accidents, we can still pray for all of our church leaders in this regard. Don't just pray for our physical health. Pray for church leaders' mental health as well. And church leaders have to make dozens of decisions throughout the day and throughout the week. Leaders need discernment and wisdom. Church leaders feel stress and pressure every day. So pray that God will give us peace that only He can give. Leaders plus prayer partners equals victory, church. Exodus chapter 17, verse 13. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. And so what's the role of the goal of a church leadership? It's to mold the local church into a biblical, functioning team. like a well-oiled machine. What's a team? A team is a group of people working together to accomplish the same goal. What's new for your consideration? What's the ultimate goal of the team? It's to be victorious over the obstacles that prevent leadership from achieving that goal. The Israelites seized the moment, and together they shared a great victory because each did their own part that they were called to do. And Joshua and the soldiers, they fought on the field, and Moses interceded with God, and Aaron and Hur stood at Moses' side and held up his arms to ensure that the victories against the Ammonites was going to happen. And if we want the church to succeed, we need our leaders to succeed. And we as leaders need you to uphold us in prayer. We need you to pray for our families, our spouses, our protection, our health, our minds. Got to pray that God will give us discernment and wisdom so that we as the church of Jesus Christ in our community might accomplish the furtherance of the gospel of Jesus Christ, because that is what we are called to do in Paulding County and around the world. And as we get ready to close out this message tonight, here are 5 quick roles and outcomes. 1, leadership determines the direction of the church. Number 2, structure determines the size of the church. Number 3, relationships determine the morale of the church. Number 4, personnel determine the potential of the church. And number 5, prayer determines the effectiveness of the church. And so I have this question for you tonight. Will you be our MVP? Will you be our most valuable prayer? And so we're going to take a pledge tonight. Pledge 4. It's a pledge that doesn't require a whole lot of time. It does require discipline. And if you can just spend 5 minutes a day and pray over your church and pray over the leaders of this church, you will see a mighty work of God continuing to be accomplished here at TRC. John Maxwell said this: the detonator that churches lack today is prayer. It has the power to ignite the dynamite of the gospel and powerfully shake the world. It doesn't matter what time you pray during the day, as long as you pray. You can do it first thing in the morning. You can do it on your lunch break at work. You can do it right before you go to bed at night. But can I tell you, if you're not faithful and if you don't know what time you are going to pray tomorrow, I can rest assure you without a doubt, you will not do it. And as church members, we must be willing to pray for our church, pray for our members, and pray for our leadership in our church. Without ongoing intercessory prayer of our church will never be as healthy as it should be, and it will not access the full power of God as it can if we do not have most valuable prayers. And so here's the 4th pledge tonight as we close. That I will pray for my church leaders every day. That I understand that a church leader's work is never ending. That their days are filled with numerous demands and will bring emotional highs and lows. That they sometimes have to deal with critics and problems. That they have to be good husbands and great fathers and great wives, great mothers. Because my church leaders cannot do everything in their own power, I will pray for their strength and their wisdom every single day. Would you take that pledge with me tonight? I pray for my pastor, Daryl Johns, every single day. Because I know that my pastor, as incredible as he is, he cannot do it by himself. Neither can I. Thank you. Hope this challenges you. I love this series that we're going through. I'm a church member. We will see you on Sunday in person at 10:15. Please don't forget to wear your mask. We're trying to do social distancing as the best as we possibly can. But our space is starting to fill up more and more. So it is getting tight in here. But hey, God's getting the glory. Nobody in our church has gotten COVID. And I thank God for that. And so we're being as careful as we can. So help us continue to be careful and keep our members safe, please. Thank you for being faithful for midweek service. I hope you have an incredible rest of the week. I hope God blesses you. And I'm praying for you. Sister Charmaine is praying for you. We love you all. And we'll see you on Sunday morning.